Canada's team. That's what we're trying to call the Vancouver Canucks. Now that the Calgary Flames and Montreal Canadiens have been eliminated from the playoffs, the Vancouver Canucks are the last Canadian team with the chance of winning the Stanley Cup. The first Canadian team to win the Cup since 1993. How do we feel about this Canada team moniker? We discussed that on the Hockey Podcast.
I hate this narrative of Canada's team that just because whoever, it doesn't matter if it's the Canucks, if it's the Flames, if it's Toronto, the idea that just because the team is based out of Canada, that it is Canada's team. The only thing that is Canada's team is when it's either the Olympics or an international tournament where the teams are actually made up of Canadians. Does that actually matter? So this idea that like you have to cheer, you have to cheer for the Canucks because they're Canada's team. Like around here, being based out of Calgary, like at least like I feel like at least 98% of the Flames fans I know better than to ever think that we're gonna cheer for the Canucks, right? Like you don't do that. Like that's just.
I think there's a difference between cheering for and supporting the idea of the cup going to a Canadian team. You know, like for me, this would be if Toronto were in the Stanley Cup final. Would I be rooting against Toronto? No. Would I be cheering for Toronto? Well, not per se. Would I like to see the cup come back to Canada and allow Canadians to enjoy a Stanley Cup victory and you know, it's our game and our cup and all those kinds of feelings? That's where I think that people should kind of be supportive of the idea. But I think there's a difference between sort of peripherally supporting a certain outcome and then investing in another team just because the city's based in Canada. Like I don't know. And for Canuck fans, I don't even think a lot of them want the whole Canada's team narrative anymore. People felt that Canadians were not getting behind the Canucks when they were in the finals against Boston way back when. And I don't think anybody cares about it anymore now.
From what I saw on Twitter yesterday, there was people complaining about how they're like, oh, Canada didn't get behind us in 2011. They're not going to get behind us now. So
I do feel like so far, though, there seems to be more positivity around the Canucks from Eastern media. And again, it does raise the question, well, why is that? Is it because the leader of the team is from Ontario as opposed to being Swedes, or like what is it? Or is it just that they're underdogs and they're young and they're fresh on the scene and people are curious?
As it's 2020, it's just a weird year.
Yeah. I mean, 2011, I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that the Canucks were not only the number one seed in that playoff, but they were waxing teams all regular season amongst the other Canadian teams. Like when the Canucks went to Edmonton, I mean, it was just a slaughter all the time. In those days, almost every time. And same as in Calgary. I mean, the Canucks would show up and there's half the lower bowl is blue uniforms. And, fans got tired of that. So it was hard for them to get behind the Canucks when they were actually a favorite to win the Stanley Cup. So there's a lot of things that are different around at this time. At the end of the day, I mean, every team has their fan base. It's a cross-border game. It just doesn't matter, the whole Canada's team discussion.
Yeah, and we went, and I think me and Sean went through the roster of the Canucks and the Knights last night, and we figure that there is actually more Canadians on the Knights than there is.
By like two,
but there's still.
Yeah.
The team with the most Canadians is the Philadelphia Flyers with I think 20 on their bubble roster. But it doesn't matter. Like even the narrative that last spring that the Raptors were Canada's team.
I don't think there was one Canadian on the Raptors or something.
Yeah, but it's just it was like Toronto. Like what I want to see from the Raptors is embrace that you're Toronto.
Yeah,
exactly.
I
think the Raptors are uniquely Toronto, and they should embrace that. Yes, you want to be able to get other people to watch, but the people like the basketball fans around Canada are going to have their different teams. And yes, some of them, there's a good chunk that have moved over to the Raptors, but I think part of it is just you just get inundated with everything Toronto, and then every time they try and narrate something as Canada's, it almost always, for the most part, it has been a Toronto team that gets that label, and it just rubs people the wrong way.
The only reason why the Raptors and the Blue Jays are Canada's team supposedly is because Canadians have access to all of their games on TV. It's not like that with the other teams in those sports, right? I mean, there's a lot of people in the Lower Mainland that would associate with the Seattle Mariners, but not all 162 Seattle Mariners games are on TV in Vancouver, whereas the Blue Jays are. So, if you want to pick a team to latch onto that you don't have locally, I mean, for me, it's the Blue Jays because we were able to see all the games.
Yeah, and I get that. I just don't think it's. I think the Blue Jays you can actually do that with, but I think I just look at the Raptors and I see them as uniquely Toronto and how Toronto just completely embraced them, the multiculturalism and everything. And you look at when you had Jurassic Park and then Maple Leaf Square going back-to-back nights, it was completely different. Like, for the most part, it was a completely different demographic. And it felt like they should just embrace that the Raptors are Toronto to me.
And it's a very, there's probably a lot, I don't know this for sure, but there's probably a lot of people in Toronto that are basketball people, but not hockey people. The last time I was in Toronto was in 2017. They were playing Washington in the first round at the time. And, just a little anecdote here. I mean, I'm at a bar on Bloor Street, just, we had gone to a Blue Jays game that night, and the Leafs were, that was the game. I think it was Kapanen won it in overtime in Washington. And there was like one person cheering in the bar. Like, this is downtown Toronto with the Leafs in the playoffs, and there was just indifference mostly in the bar. And it kind of showed me, it's like, yes, it's a very big city, but there's people that are interested in things other than the Maple Leafs.
And before we move on, I just want to say, like, you talked about how you support the idea of a Canadian team winning the Cup. Meanwhile, I think there's a lot of us fans out there who have a little bit of a petty streak to us, and as I say us, because I'm definitely part of that, is the only Canadian team I want winning the Stanley Cup is mine. Everyone else can shove it. I don't care.
You can follow us on Twitter at podcast_hockey. You can also subscribe on iTunes, Google, Spotify, and iHeartRadio, as well as join us for live recaps during every Calgary Flame and Vancouver Canuck playoff game. Facebook.com, The Hockey Podcast.